Hi everyone, it's Kate,
Gina,
with the Women's March Minnesota, and we are here today because we want to highlight one of our partners. And Gina, do you want to explain a little bit more?
the ACLU of Minnesota is an affiliate of the National ACLU, and they're doing really good work here in Minnesota around legislation that is going to restrict right of free speech, and they're going to be working really hard to make sure that those bills don't get passed, if at all possible. They need your support and they need your help, and we're here to find out more about that today.
Great. So I'm going to turn the camera around here and we're going to focus on our two guests today with the ACLU Minnesota. We've come prepared with some questions, and then if those viewing have further questions they want to ask, feel free to leave those in the comments section, and we'll, if we have time, try to answer as many as we can. So bear with me 2 seconds here. Okay. Sorry guys that are watching. I hope no one's having a headache from the show. There we go. Okay, and then if I could have you guys scoot in a little more. Perfect. So, introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about ACLU Minnesota.
Hi, I'm Teresa Nelson, and I am legal director for the ACLU of Minnesota, so I primarily coordinate our litigation program.
And my name is Jana Korn, and I'm the Communications and Education Director for the American Civil Liberties Union of Minnesota, and I do outreach and advocacy work.
So we're the statewide affiliate of the National ACLU, and so what that means is we are connected to the national organization, but we also have, we're incorporated here in Minnesota. We have a board of directors here, and we work solely on Minnesota issues that arise in Minnesota.
And the ACLU's mission is to defend people's constitutional rights. So we defend people's constitutional rights through filing lawsuits, through fighting for their rights at the state capitol, and through doing education and outreach work.
Wonderful. So one of our first questions is regarding the executive order banning immigrants and refugees. It's obviously something that's very close to the hearts of many Minnesotans. So what I'm wondering is, can you tell us your views on this ban and the executive order, how it affects citizens in the United States traveling to and from the countries that are impacted?
Yeah, and I'll take that one. Absolutely. So first of all, I can't tell you how many families I have talked to in the last few days who have loved ones who are stuck overseas, who have valid visas, and their spouses, their fathers, siblings aren't able to travel because of this ban, and this has just been devastating to Minnesota families. The impact, as the situation is very chaotic and changing. This executive order was put into place with very little planning and not a whole lot of guidance beforehand on how to implement it, so implementation has changed. What we know now is that lawful permanent residents, so green card holders, should be able to travel and be admitted into the United States without any difficulties. I know of at least 2 lawful permanent residents who have been able to get through and get in. Over the last day or so, we've gotten word that the Secretary of State has effectively revoked visas for people overseas. That's going to make it much more difficult. We haven't really seen anything written on that, but it's starting to look like visa holders overseas are going to have more and more trouble traveling overseas.
And I would just add, just as a foundational understanding to make sure everyone knows, is that when the executive order was signed on Friday, it singled out 7 countries, which include Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. There could be other countries that are added, and it also banned kind of the resettlement of any refugees for a certain period of time as well. And then Syria is indefinitely banned. There's a shorter ban on the other 6 countries.
And it did all kinds of terrible things, not just with regard to travel, but also it reduced the number of refugees that can be accepted in this fiscal year, and a lot of other really complicated immigration law things that are very troubling.
So if people are concerned about loved ones or friends, what do you recommend that they do?
Well, If they're green card holders, I would recommend that they let their family members here know what their travel plans are. And there is a network of attorneys. There's a lot of, the bar in Minnesota has really stepped up, and there are, teams of lawyers at the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport every day. They're ready to advocate for people. And so if they know that somebody's coming in, they can make sure that that person gets through and take action if they don't. And so they can either connect with that team through us or through the Advocates for Human Rights, Center for New Americans, the International Refugee Assistance Project. So there's a lot of organizations that are working on this issue, and that's one thing. If they are visa holders, there are 2 court orders that are useful. The New York, a federal court in New York, basically prohibits the government from detaining people or sending them back once they've arrived at a port of entry in the United States. And then a court order out of Massachusetts prevents the detention of individuals, and I'm blanking on what else. So those 2 court orders together are complementary for people who have visas, can make it to a port of entry. They should be allowed to be allowed into the country.
Do you recommend they carry those court orders with them?
Yes, absolutely. They should carry them with them. And those orders are available on the ACLU's website. There are case pages for both cases that have all of that information on them.
So we're getting some feedback that
Okay.
we're going to ask you to repeat the questions being asked because they can't hear us.
Okay. Yeah.
So we just learned, I think in the last 12 or 24 hours, that Lori Swanson's office, the Attorney General of Minnesota, has jumped into this. Do you know more? Can you tell us more about that?
So the question is that we've just learned that Attorney General Swanson has joined the other states in, I think it's 16 or 17 other states in filing a lawsuit. And what do we know about that? I would say that there have been a lot of advocates around Minnesota who have urged Attorney General Swanson to join, and we're very pleased that she has done that. Do you want to talk a little bit about it? Okay. Basically, the lawsuit is filed by states, very similar to coordinated lawsuits that we saw under the Obama administration, states saying this executive order is unconstitutional and it's affecting people in my state, and we want it enjoined. And so that's essentially at its core what this lawsuit is about, is saying this is affecting Minnesotans, it's unconstitutional, and we need to enjoin the executive orders.
Could you explain what enjoin means?
Enjoin, yes. Sometimes it's hard with a lawyer. So enjoin means stop. Basically, it would be an order telling the federal government, you cannot enforce this executive order anymore. You have to stop doing it. And so the court order in New York that was issued enjoined the government from detaining or from sending people back to where they came from when they arrived at a port of entry. So it basically said you can't do that anymore.
I know, Teresa, that a lot of people are concerned that those court orders won't even be enforced. Can the court call on U.S. Marshals for enforcement if those court orders aren't enforced, and how would they do that?
Yes, they could. I mean, the typical...
The question was whether or not the court can call on U.S. Marshals to come in and enforce the orders that were issued by the courts.
So the typical ways to enforce a court order are to bring a motion for contempt. And so if there are instances of people violating the court order or Customs and Border Protection violating the court order, we need examples of those. And the first step is for the court to be aware of what those violations are. And then, there's the court can say you're in contempt, you're violating it, and ultimately U.S. Marshals would be called upon if necessary to enforce it.
So if people know about those violations, do you want them to call you?
They can call us here in Minnesota, or they can call the affiliate in the state that they are in for those violations, and we will get it to the appropriate channels.
Do you want me to keep going?
Go right ahead.
We're going to move on then. Do you have more to say about the ban, the travel ban?
The National ACLU is working on some Know Your Rights materials in light of the travel ban. Unfortunately, because the situation is changing so quickly, it gets really difficult to have comprehensive advice. But keep checking, and we will certainly make that available.
And that'll be available on the Minnesota website and the national website?
It will be certainly
Yes.
on the...
Both.
Yeah.
They should be available on both and our social media pages as well.
Okay.
So I thought we'd move on then to the bills in Minnesota that target free speech, to try to limit that free speech. Can you tell our viewers and followers more about those bills?
Sure. You want to start?
Sure. So there's been multiple bills that have been introduced since session started in Minnesota in the beginning of January, and the bills are designed with the intent really to limit dissent. It's clear from our new legislature that they don't like dissent. They don't like people disagreeing with what they're doing. They don't like active protests happening in the streets. They don't like them happening at the airport. They don't like them happening at the interstate. So they've introduced a number of bills that would try to squash or limit or make it more challenging to exercise your freedom of speech, or make you fearful that if you exercise freedom of speech or freedom of assembly that you could face different consequences. Terry can go into a little bit of the details surrounding the bills because there are a number of them.
And I'll take it over. So there are 4 bills. The first one that has had a committee hearing is a bill, it's House File 322. For those of you who like to look at the legislature's webpage and follow along with what they're doing. And that bill,
one more time?
yes, House File 322. And that bill would allow the government to sue people who've been convicted of unlawful assembly or obstruction of a highway, which is called a public nuisance, could sue them for police response costs. So let's say, and the author of the bill has specifically cited the I-94 protest over the summer and the Mall of America protest, Black Lives Matter protest in 2014, was it, or no, 2015, as being sort of the reason for this bill. So in addition to, if you're contemplating going to a protest and you are willing to engage in an act of civil disobedience, and contemplating possibly getting arrested for unlawful assembly, not only would you be punished for unlawful assembly, but you could be charged tens of thousands of dollars for the police response. And the reason that is so problematic is because we don't charge any other group with the police costs, right? For, we don't charge violent criminals for police costs, and that is something that the taxpayers pay for, and that is a critical function of our law enforcement, and we don't do that. So we're singling out protest-related activity, but it also chills speech. If you want to go to a demonstration and you may end up footing the bill for an overwhelming and unreasonable police response, you might think twice about going to that demonstration.
Well, and the other problem too is this gives the government the ability to decide after the fact what is considered unlawful. If you go to a protest that you thought was going to be lawful and it turns out 5 times more people were there than expected, so you took over the street without a permit, now all of a sudden that's been deemed unlawful after you gathered thinking it was going to be a peaceful, lawful protest, and you could still face repercussions for that. And furthermore, they would have discretion to decide, well, which protests are they going to sue? Are they going to just do Black Lives Matter? Are they going to, what about the anti-choice protests that happen in front of Planned Parenthood? Are they going to go after them as well if they have an unlawful protest? This discretion, the discretion would allow them to just pick and decide which, what they consider unlawful. They may not decide to call the one outside of Planned Parenthood unlawful, but they would decide to call the one Black Lives Matter unlawful. And even though we would have problems with how they distinguish that, there could still be or there would still be problems going through court with all of that.
Yep. And they could even, the government has complete discretion. Let's say you have a demonstration and counter demonstrators, and there are, it gets out of hand and people on both camps are convicted of unlawful assembly. The government could say, well, we don't like this group's viewpoint and their message. We're going to sue those people, but not the people from the other group. And so there's sort of some uneven, picking and choosing whose message is protected and whose isn't. So that one's really problematic. So moving on, that's the only one that's had a hearing, and that has passed out of one committee. Did you have?
I was just
more
going to
to
say
add?
it's going to the Public Safety Committee. So there'll be another chance at a hearing in a smaller committee, and at that point it could go to another committee, or it could go to the floor, the House floor, for a vote.
If people want to get engaged with lobbying about this bill, is it time for them to do that now, or should they wait a little bit longer?
They should do it. They could do it now, and they could do it in a couple of ways. They can contact their own representative to make sure their own representative knows. And I would also encourage them to contact all the members of the Public Safety Committee at the House, which you can find in the Minnesota House Legislature's website. And if you search public safety, you can see all the members. You should also contact them, even if they are not your direct representatives, to let them know you're a constituent of Minnesota and you don't want them to vote for this bill when it appears before the House committee.
And you can also talk to the governor
Yes.
about your concerns, because ultimately, if it makes it through the legislature, he is going to have either a veto or a signature. So we should be talking, and people should be talking to the governor as well. So the next two bills I'm going to kind of talk about together. They are House File 55 and House File 390. They're different versions of basically the same idea, which is that instead of a misdemeanor penalty for blocking highways, blocking public roads, it would be a gross misdemeanor. Now, to give you a sense of that difference, a misdemeanor is punishable by 90 days in jail and a $1,000 fine or both. And a gross misdemeanor is up to a year in jail and a $3,000 fine or both. So it's a significantly higher penalty. So the one version would apply to any public right of way. So that would include sidewalks, streets and sidewalks. So if you have, a group of U of M students who have a sit-in on a public sidewalk and get charged with public nuisance for blocking a sidewalk, they could face up to a year in jail for that. The other one is a little more specific. It refers to specifically highways, and then it adds transit and airports. So again, the general idea is that if you're blocking traffic or if you're inconveniencing people, you should go to jail for up to a year. And again, this is really troubling. It's very chilling on speech. We would be punishing the inconvenience of people on the same level as we punish crimes of violence. 5th degree domestic assault, 5th degree criminal sexual conduct are gross misdemeanors. And so we would be, there's a lot of other really troubling crimes that we punish as gross misdemeanors. And so we would be treating nonviolent obstruction in that same way, and that's really troubling.
And those bill numbers again, one more time?
House File 55 and House File 390.
And are they in committee right now?
They have been referred to committee. They have not had any committee hearings yet.
And we should add with those, the bar was pretty low, where even if you accidentally impede traffic, or if you don't mean to, you could still face a gross misdemeanor charge. So once again, they have a pretty low bar for receiving that high penalty, because they talk about intent. And so if you didn't intend to block an ambulance, but you did, then there you go. You are going to be charged with a penalty that could face up to a year in jail.
And I would add that those two bills seem to be the ones that have the most legs. Even though they haven't had committee hearings, it seems like, just based on what we're hearing, they might have some bipartisan support even. So these two are pretty critical to talk to your legislators about.
And it's not too early to do that?
It's not too early, no. And then the last bill is House File 34. And again, this one is really troubling. This would make it basically a felony for any obstruction of the legal process. So obstruction of the legal process can be things like fighting with a police officer, and that's already a felony. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and not just physical fighting
Right.
you're talking about. You're also talking about like physically interfering, saying, don't arrest these people, things like that. We're not just talking about assaulting when you're saying fighting, right?
Yeah, but yes. So when you're actually fighting with an officer, that's already a felony.
Yes.
But there are other things that can be obstruction. Things like if you're being arrested, going limp. And making it more difficult for an officer to arrest you. That is an obstruction. We've had people arrested and charged with obstruction for peacefully videotaping police from a distance. And our position is that violates the First Amendment, but a court disagreed with us and refused to dismiss those charges. We got the jury found a not guilty verdict, but it's feasible that even filming an officer could result in felony charges now with this statute. And so the current way the statute is written has 3 different punishments. There's a felony punishment, a 1 year in prison, 1 year or more in prison, a gross misdemeanor punishment, and a misdemeanor punishment, depending on whether or not you have caused harm to an officer, things like that. So this basically puts all 3 categories up to a felony. And given that people engaged in First Amendment activities are often charged with obstruction, this is incredibly chilling and a really, really horrible bill.
And again, that's HF 34. If you want to
Yes.
repeat that, and is that in committee as well?
That one has been referred to committee. I am not sure which committee. I apologize, but it has not had a hearing yet.
And again, it's okay to go ahead and contact.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And we should add,
Absolutely.
in, for those of you who don't understand, a felony level, right, between a gross misdemeanor. A felony level, that's when you lose your right to vote in Minnesota. And in Minnesota, you don't just lose the right to vote while you're in prison, but if you are out of prison or out of jail and you are on probation for 15 years, for 10 years, for 5 years for a felony conviction, you lose your right to vote that whole time. So you have that added penalty that comes in at the felony level of losing your right to vote. And now the ACLU is working to change that. We want it so as soon as you're released from jail, you have your rights to vote restored, but that hasn't happened.
We have a question from a viewer who wants to know, is the same person behind all these bills?
That's an excellent question, and the answer is yes. So mostly, yeah. So the House File 34 and House File 322, I believe, are both authored by Representative Zerwas, and then he has also authored, House File 390. And then Representative Garofalo authored House File 55. Incidentally, if you go onto the legislature's website and search for these bills, there's a link that says authors and status. And from that, you can see if your legislator is an author on these bills. And you can contact that person directly. And that will also give you updates about how it's moving through the process.
Do you have anything else to add about those bills and what the viewers should consider doing to make sure that those bills don't make it very far?
Aside from reaching out, contacting your legislators, not just by email, but by phone calls as well. Emails are effective, but phone calls are even more effective. And you also have the right, as anyone who's a resident of Minnesota, to show up at the Capitol, which means you can go to those committee hearings. So if you sign up on the legislature to follow the legislature's website to follow these bills, you will get a notice when there's going to be a committee hearing on them. And you can show up. You can sign up to testify against these bills while they are being heard in the committee's level, and you can show up and have your voice heard at the Capitol as well.
Wonderful. We have a few more questions, and I'm going to try to speak up so people can hear. One of our followers is asking, how can lawyers that don't practice in this area volunteer and be helpful?
That's a great question, and we've gotten a lot, really an outpouring of offers for help. Right now I think the most immediate need is to have a presence at the airport, although I think that is, hopefully diminishing as the risk of people being detained lowers. But for now, there has been a steady stream of people present at the airport. And so that is something that is being coordinated by primarily Regina Jeffries from the Center for New Americans. But if people contact me, I can pass that information along. We're also anticipating that there are going to be additional, possibly immigration raids and other issues where volunteer attorneys will be needed to help with bond hearings for individuals who are taken into custody by ICE in the next few months as enforcement steps up. We're also, concerned about the need for criminal defense lawyers as protests grow and people might be facing criminal charges for their protests. So there are a lot of things for people to do that don't practice immigration law or don't practice, or they're not litigators, but certainly, yeah, and use your voice. Attorneys have a lot of credibility, and so use your voice with your congressman, with your state government, with your city government. Send letters to the editor, op-ed pieces. All of those things are critical right now.
Well, that's a good segue to our next section, which is what can Minnesota residents do that would be helpful to the efforts of the ACLU and your efforts within the ACLU?
Sure. So there's a lot of ways. One of the first ways, which is not going to surprise everyone, is to become a member or donate. In times like this, we really need to ramp up. We want to be able to make sure that we are fully staffed and ready to do that work. We recently added an additional part-time lobbyist to handle the all the bad work that we're fighting at the Capitol. But if you donate now, in the next week, we actually are having a $10,000 match, so you can have double the impact with your gift. You can give online at aclu-mn.org, and you'll see a button on the side that says donate. There's two ways to donate. One is just to generally donate, which means it's the tax deductible gift, and the other way is to become a member, and that means your money will go towards lobbying efforts as well. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and you can sign up for our action alerts, which you can also do on our website, and that would make sure that you get emails from us when there's bills coming up, and you want people to contact their legislators. You can also sign up to volunteer on our website, and we have a number of ways you can get involved, such as going to protests and handing out Know Your Rights card, what to do if you're arrested or stopped by the police. And there's other opportunities you can sign up for on our website as well, which again is aclu-mn.org.
Are there any other questions?
We don't have any more questions on our side, so for those that are watching right now, please feel free to throw up any questions that you have. Great opportunity to get some honest opinions from our experts here. I do have a comment that I'm seeing that says, is the ACLU involved at all on HF 600 preemption bill that's having a hearing today?
I am not sure if we are. I know Ben, our legislative director, is at the Capitol right now. I do not know. If it is, I'm not sure what preemption means. If we're talking about, there's a lot of things that preemption could mean. So I guess I can't speculate about whether or not we're involved.
The other thing too is if anyone wants to ask any questions while you have us here, one of the things we often talk about, what are your rights? So if you have any questions about what are your rights while you're protesting, what are your rights around the police, we'd be happy to answer those questions right now as well.
How much time do we have?
We still have a half hour.
Well, let's do a Know Your Rights training.
Oh, yep, let's do that, and then we can go on to a few more questions.
Okay, I'll let you start since you do most of our Know Your Rights training.
There are, when you think about your rights around the police or protesting, I'll start with police, since that's a lot of the times who you're going to be interacting with if that's who's going to be arresting you, right? If something may happen or if you're worried about that, and you're going to have to be more actively aware of what to do. So there's three common areas you might be interacting with the police, or three most common ways that the police pull you over, right? If the police approach you on the street, like if you're at a protest or just in general, or if the police come to your house. Those are kind of the three most common ways that a person might face an encounter with the police. So I'll kind of go over on the street first, since we're talking with people who might be activists or people who are out there wanting to exercise their rights and interacting with the police. If a police officer approaches you on the street and they say, you know, what are you doing? Why are you here? You know, what's going on? You know, if they start questioning you, if you feel like, okay, something, you know, suspicious is going on here. Why are they just coming out to me randomly? The police do have the authority and the ability to come up to anyone they want and kind of ask them some questions. And then your rights kind of start when you think about how should I interact with, what do I want to give back to this police officer? Well, technically, you don't always have to identify yourself to the police officer. It's generally helpful and it's going to make the conversation flow smoother if you do say who you are. Although the only time you legally have to identify yourself is if they suspect that you've committed a crime. But if they start asking you questions like, you know, where are you going? What's in your backpack? You know, who are you hanging out with? All those questions, you can decide because of our Constitution not to answer those questions if you don't feel comfortable. So if at any point you don't want to answer the police officer's questions, you can always say, no, I don't feel comfortable answering your questions. You know, am I being placed under arrest? If not, am I free to go? And you can kind of keep repeating that. You could say, no, I don't feel answering any questions until I have an attorney present. No, I don't feel answering any questions until I have a parent present, right? If you are a minor and they are coming up to you. There's lots of reasons why you may not feel comfortable interacting more with a police officer. And if they ask you, you know, I want to search your bag, right? A police officer can't just search your bag because they want to, right? They can't just search your bag because of the color of your skin, because they think that you're committing a crime because of race or because of gender or sexual orientation. They have to have a legal reason or suspicion of a legal reason in order to search your bag. And if you think that they don't actually have a good reason, you can always tell them, no, I do not consent to this search. However, I'm not going to physically stop you. That's letting the officer know you're not going to be aggressive, you're not going to push them away, but you are not giving them permission to search your bag.
And as the lawyer, I would recommend that you always make it clear that you do not consent, even if you think they might have a good reason to search you, that you just simply always say, I do not consent to this search, because you waive your rights when you consent to that search.
Yeah, and if you go to the car scenario, for example, and let's say they are pulling you over in your car, once again, they don't always need a warrant to search your car, but we still always recommend saying no. And let's say you're like, well, I have nothing to hide, you know, you can go ahead and search my car. And let's say you have a couple friends with you, right? You're like, I'm good, go ahead, search my car. What if you don't know your friend has a joint in their pocket and they throw it in your back seat? And now they search the car and they see drugs in the car. And those could be, that could lead to obviously more complications for you, right? Or what if you're a minor and you don't know your parents left a case of wine in the trunk and you're driving their car and now all of a sudden you're a minor in possession of alcohol. There's a lot of reasons where even if you feel comfortable giving up your rights, you know, the ACLU would encourage you to say, no, I don't consent to this search.
By not consenting, does it give you options legally down the road that could help you get out from under the problem that you're in?
It does, because the Fourth Amendment generally covers searches, and the courts will look at in determining whether a search was legal or not, whether the police had a warrant, if they had probable cause, if they had reasonable suspicion, or if they had consent. And so the minute that you give police consent, you don't have Fourth Amendment rights anymore because you have waived them. So you've given up your rights, and anything that they find that could be used against you, the wine in the trunk, can be without any problems whatsoever. So if you did not consent and the search was illegal, courts will typically throw out that evidence and they won't let it be used in a prosecution. So that's why it's so important to not waive that right, because you don't know what's in your car.
And I think that's really hard for people right now because they want to be safe from terrorism. So they think, well, if I just make sure that the police know that I'm a safe person, then we'll all be safer. And they're willing to give up that Fourth Amendment protection, not knowing what the consequences might be. Yeah. We have a question here from Jess regarding to non-consent to a search. Do you have recommendations regarding a recording device, like getting out your smartphone and recording what's happening? Is that a good idea, a bad idea?
You know,
Depend?
I think it depends, and if you feel safe doing it, then it's a very good idea. We also recommend that bystanders, if you're seeing something, you have the right to record the police as long as you're a safe distance away and not physically interfering with the police. I'll turn it over to Jana about our mobile justice app.
We have something you can download for free in the App Store today for iPhones and Android phones. It's called Mobile Justice Minnesota. If you search those terms, you'll find it. It's an app where you can download it, and you can do a couple things on the app. The first thing you can do is you can film the police. So if you are a bystander witnessing an incident with the police and you feel like it might start to get tense and you want to make sure it's filmed, and then those videos automatically get sent to ACLU attorneys to review. So you can ensure that no matter what happens, that video will be sent there. And the other thing you can do on that is you can fill out a complaint form where if you feel like your rights have been violated, you can fill out a short form through your phone to talk about an incident you may have had with the police where you felt like your rights were violated. And it also has Know Your Rights materials kind of right at your fingertips of what you should do if you are stopped by the police. Now, oftentimes, if you are about to get arrested, you're not going to be able to continue to film, right? Your phone's going to get taken when you're arrested. But even if your phone is taken when you're arrested, if you are filming through our app, even if your phone is taken, as long as once the phone turns off, the video will send to us. So you can be assured that at least you have some measure of protection over that getting to us.
Can you repeat the name of that app?
Mobile Justice Minnesota. There's Mobile Justice for multiple states because a lot of the states have their own. The same app, but just so the legal documents go to the right state. So just make sure you hit Minnesota.
Yeah. So, and if you live in a different state, the Minnesota one won't work to send video to that state. So they are geographically specific. But the only other thing that I would add is when you're in the moment with a police officer, you really do need to make a decision about if the officer is being really confrontational about your videotaping, whether you want to risk arrest, whether you want to risk further consequences in that moment. And that is your decision. We have had people arrested for filming the police. Unfortunately, that is the reality. We believe that there is a constitutional right. There are departments that are starting to put out guidance to officers to say, no, you can't.
Like Minneapolis?
Yeah, like Minneapolis has done. But I can't promise that you won't get arrested.
And the other thing, too, is that every time you give up your rights to a police officer, right, you give up your right by allowing them to search your car even when they don't have a good legal reason, or search your backpack, or even search your house without a warrant, then you're kind of emboldening the idea that officers don't need that. They don't need to go through proper legal channels. So that's another reason why we would continue to encourage you to do that, because officers need to know that I respect my rights and you shouldn't do this unless you are following the rule of law.
So is there another chapter to the Know Your Rights training?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So do you want to keep going on that?
Yeah, I'll talk about house for a minute, and then if you just want to talk for a few minutes about immigrants and if
if
ICE comes. So if the police officers come to your house, that's where you have the strongest protections, right? Almost all of us know the get a warrant, right? People hear it, they say it all the time. That comes from the Fourth Amendment to our Constitution. So if the police show up at your door and they want to search, they are going to have one of two types of warrants, and you should be able to ask to see these, either a warrant to search the house or the warrant for an arrest of somebody who is living in the house or they have reason to believe resides in the house. If they have a valid warrant, which like I said, you can ask to see through there, they will come in. Even if you don't let them in, they will come in anyways. But what you can do is if the police knock at your door, what I encourage people to do is actually to not let them in immediately. Ask to see the warrant through a peephole or through a window on the side, or go out the front door, shut the door behind you, and either have a conversation on your front step, on your front porch, in the hallway of an apartment building, whatever it may be, so you're not allowing the police officers into your house until you know you have to. And if they don't have a warrant, there's very few reasons that police officers can come into a house without a warrant. One of them is if there's a huge fire in your house, someone's screaming for help, right? There's an emergency situation, right? A police officer or emergency personnel could go in to kind of remedy that. Or is that they're chasing a suspect and they watch them run into your house, right? And they're following them. Not just because later on they suspect they went there, but they actually have to be following them. Other than that, they can't come into your house without a warrant. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It doesn't matter if they, look in the windows and they see something that looks suspicious. That doesn't mean they get to come in, and they still have to get a warrant. And I especially say this to young people, right? Young people, I know when I was in college, right? Police would show up if there's a suspect there's a party and come in without a warrant all the time. Even in those situations, police need a warrant.
And to get a warrant, they have to go to a court, and they have to show the court that they have grounds or reason, they have factual reasons that they need to see what's inside that house or that car.
Yep,
Exactly.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
And then I would say one more thing. If you're arrested in any of these things, you always can say, I'm not going to answer any questions until I have a lawyer present, right? That also comes from our Constitution, your right to have a lawyer. If you cannot afford one, one should be provided to you, and you can always never answer police officers' questions.
A lot of people think if they just cooperate, then the police will let them go. What do you think of that strategy?
As an attorney, my advice is to never, ever, ever, ever talk to the police without having an attorney present, because you often, you may think, again, I've got nothing to hide. There's nothing that they can arrest me for, but you have no idea necessarily what their questions really are about. And there are countless examples of people who have confessed to things that they did not do. People who have confessed to crimes because there's been sort of a circular questioning, things like that. And so it is, no matter how confident you are that simply answering their questions is going to resolve the issue, do not answer questions without an attorney present.
And what are the magic words you should use in that situation?
You say, I don't want to talk to you without an attorney present. You actually have to specifically say, I want an attorney. Simply remaining silent in and of itself is not going to be enough. There are court decisions. You have to make it clear and unambiguous that you want to exercise your right to remain silent and that you want an attorney present.
And they're supposed to stop talking to you at that point, correct?
That's correct. They are supposed to stop talking to you. And in Minnesota, when somebody is interviewed, state law requires that that interview be recorded anytime that you are in custody. Now, one thing to clarify, so a lot of people will say, well, I was arrested, but they didn't read me my rights. You have the right to remain silent, etc. And that in and of itself, is problematic, and they should be reading your rights, but it only comes into play if after the arrest they are questioning you and you're in custody and they're questioning you. If they question you out on the street and you're clearly free to leave, they don't have to tell you that you have the right to remain silent. So just always remember that you have that right, and if you're, that you should, when police want to question you, politely say, you know what, I don't want to talk to you without an attorney present.
And one thing too, just so you can feel comfortable, is the way the Fifth Amendment works to the Constitution is that just by refusing to answer the police officer's questions, or by doing that can't make you look guilty. They can't go to court and say, oh, this person won't answer a question without a lawyer, that means they're guilty. That's not how it works. So it's not going to be any worse for you, right, despite what the police officers may say, if you refuse to answer their questions.
Quick question from Kathy. She said, I missed the beginning. Are the bills being discussed federal or Minnesota state bills? So
they're Minnesota state bills. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so with immigration, immigration law is a lot more complicated, and so I'm not an immigration lawyer, but there are a lot of other organizations in Minnesota that do some amazing work on immigration that we've worked with. But generally speaking, if immigration and customs enforcement comes to your door, if the FBI comes to your door, it's pretty much the same principle as the police, right? You don't have to let them in without a warrant, and you should ask to see a warrant, either if it's a search warrant or a warrant specifically for an individual's arrest. You don't have to answer their questions without an attorney present. Now, there are some consequences with immigration law where if an ICE agent is questioning you and you're a visa holder or a lawful permanent resident, there are things that under federal law you are required to provide them with your information about your green card and things like that. So I don't want to get into that too much, but generally speaking, you don't have to answer questions by ICE about your immigration status. You don't have to answer those questions by a local police officer as well.
Some people might be tempted to lie in that situation because they're afraid of telling the truth. What do you think about giving a false name or false information to the FBI or ICE?
So those are crimes in and of themselves, giving false information, and especially falsely claiming U.S. citizenship can have really dire immigration consequences, and so that is a very, very bad idea to do. So it's better to exercise your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent than to lie in that situation. The other thing is that Immigration and Customs Enforcement has some policy guidelines that talk about what kinds of enforcement they can do at sensitive locations. So things like schools, churches, civic events like weddings, civic ceremonies, things of that nature, and protests. So that generally prohibit ICE from doing enforcement actions in those locations. And so, children, even if they are not citizens, even if they're undocumented, they have the right to attend school, and they should feel free to attend school, and their parents should be free to go to school without fear of enforcement by ICE at that location. The same with churches. You should be free to worship and not fear being picked up by ICE at that location. So that there are some exceptions to that, and of course that could be undone with the stroke of a pen, unfortunately. But for now, that is something that is protected.
And I'll add one final thing about protests with your rights to protest. So the way